I got a phone call to go down to the studio. Graham was on the floor trying to sing a vocal, and the engineer was asleep at the console, and the console was off, and there were no lights on in the whole place. Welcome to 1001 Album Complaints, the show where lifelong friends, musicians, and all-around pedantic nerds get together to tell the backstory on the most influential albums of all time, as chronicled in Robert Dimery's book, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. Now, if you don't know today's album super well, or not at all, no worries. We will guide you through it with lots of song clips while we dive into the backstory of the artist and the album end. Along the way, we will be breaking these songs down musically, citing various hot takes, cracking lots of whys, and offering our sage musical commentary. And wait, there's more. At the end of all that, we are going to vote.
What?
On whether this album is really a must-listen before you die. Now, I must warn you that we came here to learn, but mostly to laugh and have fun. We are musicians ourselves. We understand how difficult it is to make truly great art, and we come from a place of love and respect for the craft. But we also enjoy nitpicking and complaining, as the title of our show suggests. So, bottom line, there's no sacred cows here. We won't be treating this artist or this album with any particular reverence. You have been warned. My name is Rob. I've been playing music since I was in high school and nitpicking it for even longer. And tonight we will be discussing an artist who had a dream about legitimizing and spreading awareness for American country music, about celebrating the tradition and adding to it and maybe reforming it for a modern era in the process. But he's also a guy about whom Keith Richards, legendary rock and roll drug user, once commented, this guy could get better coke than the mafia. I am speaking, of course, about Graham Parsons. And tonight we're diving into his second and unfortunately final solo release called Grievous Angel. Let's get right to the music by playing a clip of the opening track. It's called The Return of the Grievous Angel.
Want to scratch my itch, sweet Annie Rich, and welcome me back to town. Come out on your porch or step into your parlor, and I'll tell you how it all went down. Out with the truckers and the kickers and the cowboy angels, and a good saloon in every single town. Oh, and I remembered something you once told me, and I'll be damned if it did not come true. 20,000 roads I went down, 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 and they all led me straight back home to you.
Okay, now you know where we're coming from here. You're acclimated to the music we've been listening to, in case you're not already familiar, and we are going to go around the horn and give our short, snarky, mean tweet length reviews and introduce who's on our panel today. I'm going to send it first to Adam.
Hey everybody, this is Adam. Very excited to talk about this album. And my tweet is, Grievous Angel is just like a down-home country meal. Perhaps a casserole, but there are some biscuits on the side that kinda outshine the casserole, and you ask your moo-maw for the recipe because the ingredients are right, but there's something off with the proportions. 2 cans of twang, check. A bag of Americana, check. A couple slices of heartache, check. A sprinkle of pedal steel, check. Ah, here it is. I think I see the problem. 1 gram of songwriting. Just not enough.
Nice. We are going to send it right along to Phil.
Adam, what the hell did you just say? That was the most ridiculous thing you've ever said.
It was the biggest wind-up for a stupid pun about his name.
So my tweet length review is, do you hate the fucking Eagles? Do you hate Linda Ronstadt? Do you hate the Rolling Stones songs where Mick just rambles and rambles and rambles and then hits the chorus? Well, this is the face you really want to punch.
Man, all right. That is coming in hot. All right.
Fair enough. Yeah, this is going to be a fun one, I think. And we are going to throw it to our special guest, who's going to get a proper introduction after we get through the tweets. But first, let's hear your tweet. Welcome guest, Scott.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. So, Graham Parsons wanted to make cosmic American music, and I think he succeeded. In the exact same way that I go stargazing when I press really hard on my eyes. But I did go on a journey and do some actual stargazing while listening to this album over the past week. Enough so that I could see the constellations and hear the sounds of what I believe are emo night at the trailer park.
Nice.
Well done.
Okay, excited to get into it based on this, because this is all coming fresh at me, I have to tell you. But okay, this is Rob here. I'm going to be walking us down Graham Parsons' lane, and my tweet is as follows. With most songs at heroin tempo and a litany of self-pitying, self-destructive lyrics, you're allowed to be sad, but not surprised that this guy didn't make it to third.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I am excited to talk Graham Parsons. I have a lot to impart to you. It's a crazy, great rock and roll story. But first, I want to hand the mic over to our special guest and drummer for our house band, Ghost Beef, as well as the Beverly Crushers, Scott. Welcome.
Hey, guys. Thanks again so much for having me. I'm stoked to be here. I do listen regularly to the show, so it's such a treat to be able to comment on one of these albums. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this album and to hear everyone's thoughts, give some of my own, 2 cents about the tracks. I do play drums on the Ghost Beef album, so I do encourage everyone to check that out if they have a chance.
It rips. Scott's great. We're excited to get into it, and he's the only drummer on the call, so we're looking for some extra special insight there. Okay, let's send it around the room and talk general impressions on Grievous Angel. I would love to hear let's start with Adam.
Yeah, so completely new listen for me. I had experienced Graham Parsons on the Burrito Brothers record. And again, he was in the Byrds, I think, right? Rob, you'll get into the story. But I initially really liked this album, but there's kind of a caveat there. So I had spent the prior week listening to Joy Division's debut album, which was kind of like drinking vinegar for a week straight. And then somebody offered me a glass of milk, and my God, was it refreshing. But it was still kind of milk. So this didn't blow me away. I guess I was a little disappointed because there was a point where when we were doing the Loretta Lynn episode, my God, 140, 150 episodes ago, that I listened to a couple albums of hers and Conway Twitty's around the same era as this. And this just lacked something that I'm really having a hard time putting my fingers on. So I'm really looking forward to hearing everybody else's thoughts, and maybe I can try to compose myself around some of your input as well. But overall, it's a solid week, I'll say.
Well, I'm not going to spoil the lead here. I love this record. It was a favorite of my parents growing up, so I've been hearing bits of it for a very long time. It has a lot of nostalgic quality to me, but I was excited to dive into it and learn all about the history. It is understated, I will give you that, and it's certainly not perfect, right? And I have plenty of things I can point out to that effect, but I find it achingly beautiful. From the singing to the band that is such a set of studio pros that they know just how to lay back in the cut.
Yo, so good.
And only do what's needed, to Graham's voice, which is not classically amazing, but I think he's able to emote through all this naked writing, this very vulnerable, kind of heartbreaking style of writing. I think he is a great singer for it, even though Emmylou ultimately outshines him quite a bit.
I mean, you just hit on a huge item for me, Rob, which is Emmylou Harris. So for me, I liked this record a lot too this week. I thought it was very charming, and it sort of tickled a spot in me. It was the Emmylou Harris thing. Teatro is one of my favorite records, like top 10 records of all time. And a big part of that is the Emmylou Harris, the sort of like haunting, under-rehearsed, but absolutely nailed vocal harmonies, and they're just all over this record. And it's just she has just like a real gift. She brings something really cool to every record I've heard that she's on.
And just so the audience knows, you're referring to a Willie Nelson record, I believe, that was recorded in the 80s, I want to say. Teatro?
Honestly, I think it was in the 90s. I feel like it's like one of those like sneaky early 90s records. Definitely sounds like it could have been recorded in 73, 74, whenever this came out.
Kind of a late stage, semi-late stage comeback. Willie's still making records today, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, 1998.
98? Bonkers.
I agree, Teatro's a great record. As we're going to hear in the story, that Emmylou really got her career based on her performance on this record. That's how she got her record contract. That's how things really got started for her. So I do think she is exceptional. And I think the two of them together are really exceptional. And I do think the whole is greater than the sum of its parts when they're singing together. And I can't quite quantify that because I agree that her voice is so technically much better than Graham Parsons. But I think he just has a sadness in his voice that comes through.
Yes.
I agree with you guys, all three of you guys as well. And I think particularly this duet harmonizing aspect across the album is one of the highlights. And the other one, Rob, you already nailed it on the head, is really the vulnerability that I think comes through on both of the vocal performances. It really shines through on the melodies, and it finds a way to kind of bring this raw emotion to all of the songs that, this really isn't my kind of music, but I did enjoy the album more as the week progressed. And when at one point I was listening to it with my wife and she asked who was the female vocalist, and when I told her, she was shocked. And I kind of told her, yeah, this album, from what I could tell, I only did a little bit of research, but is sort of what broke her and what kind of put her on the map. So it was exciting to know that this was where she was getting her start, and knowing that she had so much more to come, in her career is really just like great trivia, and I think really brings the album more to life. And, hearing we'll probably talk about this more when we get into the tracks, but this kind of emerging Americana feel that it had as well really shines through. And I think that you can hear that vulnerability, that Americana. I joked in my tweet about emo night at the trailer park, but honestly, the first artist that I thought of when I thought of, I wonder who this is an influence for, was Bright Eyes. I feel like I could hear the kind of twangy, country, raw vulnerability in an artist like Bright Eyes coming through on this Graham Parsons album.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we did, as you mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit about it, we did cover some of Graham Parsons' earlier career on the Flying Burrito Brothers episode. I think it was back in the 50s. I have it written down somewhere. And that was a little earlier on. He's clearly was a very influential character. He knew a lot of people. A lot of other musicians looked to him and learned from him. And even Emmylou Harris, I thought this was really interesting. She said that she learned a ton from Graham. She really, really enjoyed this style of music. And she said this thing that I'll quote. She said, "By singing with Graham, I learned that you plow the overt emotion of a song under and let the melody and words carry you. Emotion will happen on its own, and you have to have restraint in how you approach a song." And I do think that's a good encapsulation of what they're kind of both doing.
That's so dope. This is great advice, by the way, for anybody who's like in a band, right? Right now, if you're in a band, stop trying so fucking hard.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, singing harder won't help.
Seriously, yeah.
You wrote the songs. You did the work, organizing the songs, arranging the songs. Like you thought about it. So like, don't go up there and just like push it harder. Like trust the work.
So let me address something else that I think Adam alluded to, and I'll admit was a slight disappointment to me when I really dove into the making of this record, is that I had been thinking that Graham Parsons had written more of these songs.
Yeah.
Listening to it growing up. That said, I think that the song choice and the curation here, the album it reminds me of a bit is Redheaded Stranger, where Willie Nelson is not necessarily writing so many of the songs. Instead, he is trying to bring back and popularize and interpret or reinterpret songs that he really likes from that country American songbook. And I think there's something really cool and noble in that. And I do ultimately feel that for the most part, the song choice here is really terrific.
Now, I did have a little bit of a different experience. I think, Scott, you said that it kind of grew on you throughout the week. With me, it was right up front. I really liked it. Again, it was a breath of fresh air. But as the week stretched on, I guess I just found it to be a bit boring. You know, I'm listening to everything and I'm interested in the context here, but there was never like that one moment that like stood out. And I listened to this probably 20 times. And they're good songs, right? They're nice, but nothing was like grabbed me by the shirt and was like, we're here, listen to us.
What's interesting about that to me, Adam, is I had a bit of an inverse experience where it was kind of like meh at first, because this isn't like really my sort of thing in general.
Sure.
It's sort of like, giving what you just said, it makes me wonder about like the sort of new fad of like cosmic country that like everybody, seems to be like.
It's hip right now.
Yeah, it's hip right now. But like it made me wonder, like maybe I'm just not giving it a fair chance, right? It took me 2 or 3 listens with this record.
My experience was similar, Phil, to yours on that inverse of Adam's, where my initial listen, the first couple times, it all did sound very samey to me. I didn't see any major delineations among the tracks that really made anything stand out. One track specifically did, which isn't on our focus list, but it's the Las Vegas song. So the Las Vegas song did have a bit of a different feel, I think, than the rest of the album, but most of the songs are kind of ballady. They do kind of hang around the same tempo as well. So they do have a lot of that sameness throughout, which it does create an experience, right? Because it does kind of set you where you're at and you stay there the whole time. But again, I think that when it comes to the vulnerability and the like rawness that's coming through on the vocals, through the melodies, that's where it's shining.
I can kind of understand what you guys are saying, because it does feel at times like they just pulled arrangements from the country playbook. And I think that's probably literally what they attempted to do. And there's nothing so outlandish about what they're doing, even lyrically. I will also agree to that. And I'm not a country guy either. None of us are. But I will say that one of the things that holds me off sometimes from getting into genres like this is a lot having to do with the vocal delivery, that feels like you're putting up a wall between me and the emotion there. So that's just what really I get out of this, is that in addition to the fact that it's this beautiful harmony for the vast majority of the vocals, they both feel very emotionally accessible. And when you tune into what they're actually saying, there's a lot of pathos there. And so I was really struck on this re-listen by how consistently depressing, I suppose, the song material was, and how internally consistent for a tragic figure it happened to be.
Rob and I just had a conversation the other day where we were listening to some top 20 Billboard songs, and the country rock songs, the first thing I said was, this auto-tuning of these country rock guys is a real travesty for country music as a whole, because it's taking away the strongest asset that it has, which is in that vocal delivery and in that emotion that should be coming through.
Totally.
For those bluesy lyrics, for the sad song that is so often being sung by these country artists.
And you know what's annoying about that too? They don't have to auto-tune it that way. Like, they could auto-tune it so it sounds like a human being. They want it to sound like a robot.
No.
Yeah, it's a weird trend, in my opinion, as well, because it does rob some emotion.
Let me delineate what I was saying earlier about Loretta Lynn and Conway Twitty, and something you just said, Rob. And I won't call this album ramshackle, but I will say that the approach, or rather the vocal delivery styles of a Loretta Lynn and a Conway Twitty and a Dolly Parton, they are seasoned veterans. They're on huge stages. They are Nashville country in the spotlight, big name on the marquee. This feels very different. So when you're talking about the vocal delivery, I actually hear a distinct difference between the two, of when Loretta's just singing it and she's just doing her Loretta thing, versus this feels a bit more authentic, in that Emmylou Harris is brand new and Graham Parsons is probably in a bad spot. So there is that delineation there that I'm now seeing.
And what an interpreter of songs has to do, and I think Emmylou and Graham are both capable of it. They both do it here, and it's what we talked about with someone like Willie Nelson, and even guys like Frank Sinatra would say, to properly sing a song, you must really embody what the lyrics are saying, the emotion that is being expressed. There can be a mismatch there that people can subconsciously sense. And so, of course, the love and I think respect of this album is certainly helped along by Graham Parsons' tragic life and passing before this was even released. But I'm okay with that. That's sort of part of the story, and I do think he was a sad and tragic figure. We're going to get into his backstory shortly. A lot of trauma, a lot of tragedy, right? Okay, we got a longish story that I want to impart to you. So let's get into it here into the background of the Graham Parsons and the Grievous Angel story. Now, in prep this week, I read a book called 20,000 Roads, The Ballad of Graham Parsons and His Cosmic American Music. And I also watched the Fallen Angel documentary about his life and times, in addition to reading various other interviews and writings. So, as I just mentioned, this is a tragic story. Graham was a self-destructive, highly traumatized guy who ultimately did inspire a lot of people with his vision for cosmic American music, as he called it, and probably is the father of anything you might deem to call alt country, but we can adjudicate that later. So the story goes way, way back to December 1941 in Pearl Harbor.
Oh, geez.
Graham's dad was a fighter pilot stationed there who was asleep when the bombing started. He ends up shooting down so many Japanese planes in the war that he gets called out by name on the Tokyo propaganda radio station.
Wow.
Holy shit.
Yo, that's wild.
His name was Cecil Coondog Connor. He's a Georgia boy, and after the war, he came home to meet Graham's mother.
Coondog, that's his birth name? That's his given middle name? Yeah, okay.
That's his Christian name, right? Yeah.
Graham's mother is a citrus heiress in Florida. Real old money stuff. Her grandfather bought some orange groves real early on, made a fortune.
Jesus Christ.
And together they come together and they make a baby called Ingram Cecil Connor, born November 1946 in a place called Waycross, Georgia, South Central Georgia, very rural. So Graham is born to parents who are basically high society Southerners. Like, we're talking mint juleps and fancy hats. Mm-hmm. And he's in a very small town. The town is too small for a record store, but folks sometimes go to the auto parts shop to swap 45. That's where they're swapping records. And his real turning point, I thought this was interesting, is that he sees Elvis live, like 6 months before Elvis goes on Ed Sullivan.
Wow.
So before he's famous at all, while he's touring all those podunk places in the South that we talked about a little bit on our Elvis episode. This would be in 1956, right? This is before Heartbreak Hotel, before everything. And he is completely transfixed. And by the way, Elvis is the opener of the show at this point.
That's so funny.
How old was he at?
Graham was like 10, or maybe eight, between 8 and 10, something
and
like that.
And before we move on, what state did Forrest Gump live in again? Because this is awful like Forrest, right?
Alabama.
Oh, thank you. Okay,
Going
good.
back to Greenboro.
Yeah, I guess the part of Georgia he's in is actually kind of closer to Florida than Atlanta. But it's definitely rural. It's a similar vibe. So from a very early age, he's hooked on music via Elvis. He starts taking piano lessons, maybe around 10. He's a very fast study. He's one of these kids who could hear something on the radio and play it back easily. He starts writing his own songs. He's intaking all this music as much as he can. And he's also a charming, confident guy with girls, from a very young age. He's also the kind of kid who thinks nothing of, let's say, greatly embellishing his stories to draw people in or entertain people. Some might call him a liar.
Or an entertainer, like you said.
Or an entertainer. But I think I am trying to get across that he was extremely charming and lovable, and you do hear that in all these interviews, all these people that he touched in his short life. So now his parents are socialites, like I said. They're not overly interested in parenting. So he kind of does whatever he wants, which will also persist throughout his life. But that said, they do have a pretty loving family. And I mentioned rich. For context, Graham's mother's family controlled 20% of the citrus industry in Florida and was worth around $300 million in today's money.
Not too bad. All right. Yeah.
So they had some cash.
So all that Florida's natural orange juice I'm buying every week is those dividends are going back to the Parsons estate, is what you're telling me?
Well, I think that the family at some point ruined it. It's one of those things where grandfather builds it, son grows it, grandson, kills it. So his dad notices his great interest in music and buys him a reel-to-reel tape recorder when he's 12. This is 1958. It's a Christmas present.
Jeez.
It's a big one. But before his dad can give it to his son, he kills himself on December 23rd.
Oh my God. 2 days before Christmas.
2 days before Christmas.
Oh my God.
Jeez.
His father shoots himself. Rumors were that his wife was stepping out, but he was also a prolific drinker. That was almost certainly a factor, as was the fact that he probably was never fully embraced by his uber-rich in-laws. You can see how that might be a challenge. And PTSD from the war, of course.
He's just an army guy hanging out with all the debutantes. Probably didn't fit in.
It is a traumatic event. So, and by the way, this is the era where after they report the death to 12-year-old Graham, it is never brought up again.
Oh, yeah, sure, of course. They're just like, Daddy is dead.
End of story. We're moving to Florida. You will never talk to your dad's family again.
Oh my God.
Here's a picture of your father in his smoking jacket. This will never be spoken of again.
By the way, get at it in your room with this tape recorder. Never mention this incident again.
So like a 2-track, a 4-track, what did you get?
I'm not sure about that, but it might have, the excitement might have been dampened slightly.
I could see that.
So they moved to Florida to be with his mother's family. His mother's distraught and lonely, and a couple months later, she meets a guy called Robert Parsons and is smitten. And this guy is like a traveling grifter type, slick back hair, investment opportunities in South America type of dude. He drives a Jag, even though he has no money. He keeps exotic animals as pets. He had an ocelot.
Florida man.
An ocelot in the 60s?
Original Florida man. Original Florida man.
Yeah, understandably, the rich family is suspicious. But actually, the truth is, Robert Parsons is pretty good to the kids. He actually does, they get married quickly. He adopts Graham and his little sister. That's how Graham got his last name. So even though he is probably not a great person, and there's sort of more evidence to that later, Graham needs a father figure, and this guy steps in. So, okay.
All right.
But guess what happens next? So they do get married. He takes the last name. They have a new baby. They're newly married. They have a new little kid, and they hire a 19-year-old babysitter to come in and watch the kid who Robert Parsons promptly has an affair with. So now it's high society, so no one's talking about it. No one can even mention the word divorce. Graham's mother basically just starts drinking more heavily, right? But okay, Graham's in school. He's focused on music. He joins his first band when he's in 8th grade. He starts hopping from band to band, first few years of high school. And I wanted to bring up that even back then, at this early age, this is like the late 50s, early 60s, these kids like to push the envelope in terms of getting messed up. They're actually living in a dry county in Florida, but they would do things like inject oranges with vodka and then take them to high school lunch and get drunk off of that.
That's kind of awesome.
Or just take random stuff from the medicine cabinet and be like, what does this do? I'll take a few. Graham was an envelope pusher.
I mean, they had all those oranges sitting around. What else are you going to do with them?
I'll be honest. I'm still stuck on the 19-year-old live-in nanny. What the fuck are you thinking? It's never going to work.
Yeah, it's not a great plan. That's a PSA for all of you would-be parents out there. So at this point, Graham's playing in various local bands. He's playing in Battle of the Bands competitions. He's mostly playing piano at this point and also singing. His parents aren't super engaged to notice his penchant for drugs. He's buying speed from truckers passing through town and stuff like that. But when he threatens to elope with a girl he just met, they step in and send him off to boarding school. So now it's 1963. The counterculture, the so-called 60s, is in its infancy. Graham starts playing guitar by now. He forms a band at boarding school called the Shilohs, basically a folk group in the style of something like the Kingston Trio or the Journeymen, which was a folk group that was fronted by young John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas. So his high school band even manages to record, and then they head to New York for a summer where they meet John Phillips, again, the guy who would later form the Mamas and the Papas, who's a folk guy at the time, after a show, just because they're coming to every show he plays. And he ends up helping them get an audition for Bob Dylan's manager, Albert Grossman, who immediately offers them a contract. And then he learns that they're all underage and still in high school and immediately rescinds that offer.
Missed opportunity.
Tough break.
Point is, he was getting a lot of good breaks. As high school's winding down, he's getting a lot of playing time. In fact, this is another indication of how rich they were, that at one point during a winter break in high school, he invites the whole band to go back to Florida. I think he's at boarding school in South Carolina. He invites his whole band to go back to Florida to stay with him for the winter break. And Robert Parsons, always trying to work the angles, he opens up an entire coffee shop specifically so the band can gig while they're there.
Man, now that's a get.
Yeah.
Graham and his friends are traveling. They're playing shows. They're hanging out in New York in the early 60s. They're really learning what being a musician is all about, which is getting stoned. Which brings us to a special backcountry drug edition of Is It Punk? All right. Now, in this game, I'm going to describe something to you, and you have to answer, is it punk or not? So, first up, when Graham was in high school, they talked about crushing up aspirins and sprinkling them into cigarettes to smoke and get high. Is that punk?
No, that's not punk. No.
That's correct, Phil. It is not punk. 9 out of 10 doctors actually recommend crushing up a baby aspirin and smoking it once a day. It significantly reduces your risk of heart attack. And we know anything that does that cannot be punk. Next up, later, when Graham made it to the scene in New York and LA, sometimes he and his friends would dip their cigarettes in a bovine tranquilizer and smoke that. They said it approximated a 2-minute acid trip. Is it punk?
Oh, hell yeah. I think that's punk. Just because that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard.
Yes, you are correct, Adam. Yes, to be a proud American, one must consume massive amounts of factory farmed beef. It's your patriotic duty, in fact. Now, we all know those poor cows have all kinds of drugs in their system already, which are getting passed on to you. But to go ahead and cut out the middleman and just take the cow drugs directly, that's punk.
You hear lots of jokes about horse tranquilizers and people really sleeping on those cow tranks. Like, that's where the real party is at.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd never heard that one either. Okay, we got one last one here. Once, after a bird show, which is later in the story, Graham traveled by Rolls-Royce with the entirety of the Rolling Stones to take LSD at Stonehenge and party there all night long. Is that punk?
That's the hardest one I've ever heard.
Stonehenge has too much historical significance, not punk.
If you would have omitted the Rolls Royce, I would have said it was punk.
The answer is yes. I mean, it's literally the coolest thing anyone's ever conceived of doing. Now, points deducted, as you mentioned, for the mode of transportation, I guess, but late 60s Stones were the coolest anti-authoritarian version of the band. Plus, Stonehenge is all about druids and rituals. That is punk.
Okay, I can see that. I'll allow it.
Punk AF. Okay, back to our story, and really back to more tragedy, which the story has plenty of. So on the eve of Graham's high school graduation, his mother dies in a hospital of cirrhosis at age 41.
God.
She drank herself to death. Bummer, right?
That sucks.
Jeez.
Graham most likely never processed this trauma either. Now, I should also point out that Graham was actually pretty smart, but also not super motivated, like maybe other rich kids we might know. So naturally, he applied to only one college, Harvard.
Jesus.
And get this, he gets in.
Yeah.
Now, actually, it's seemingly a perfect fit because it's a bunch of rich kids at a college. And it's kind of counterculture for its day, right? This is like 1965. This is about 2 years after Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert were kicked off campus and effectively became counterculture heroes. But all during this time, he's intaking a lot more country music, in particular, stuff like Buck Owens and Merle Haggard, the so-called Bakersfield sound that was breaking away from Nashville at the time. And you will all recall we covered Buck Owens on episode 139. And also Ray Charles' modern sounds in country and western music is a big influence as well, which was sort of about taking those old country songs and modernizing them and somewhat legitimizing them, right? And we discussed that on our Ray Charles episode 149, so check those out. But in any case, things are happening in the genre of country music. There's some splintering away from that really clean Nashville sound, and it's still not considered a sophisticated art form, and that is something that Graham really keys in on and wants to be a part of, right? So after a semester at Harvard, he just decides he can't hack it. He needs to pursue music. He drops out. He goes to New York. He pulls together a band called the International Submarine Band, the first of many terrible band names he will invent.
That's pretty bad.
I actually kind of like that. It's just odd. Of course, I would like it, but anyway.
He's got a real knack for naming these bands.
Okay, they tour a bit. They record and open for the Rascals in Central Park, and on a lark, they decide to try their luck in LA. While there, they open for the Doors in 1967. They meet tons of LA scenesters and party with them. Drug use ramps up, but always in the background, there's this disparity between Graham and the rest of the band. So while his bandmates are struggling to get by, Graham is rich. He's living off of a trust fund that pays him around $60,000 a year, which is the equivalent of something like $400K in today's money.
Jesus.
Must be nice.
The rest of the band does not have that luxury, of course. And even though he's relatively generous with his cash amongst his friends, it's a stark dividing line, and it really says a lot about how committed he is to working on the thing and versus his bandmates, right? So it makes it hard for everyone to be on the same page. So now in this time period, I should mention that long hairs, so-called long hairs, did not play country music. It simply was not done. In 1967, if you walked into a country bar with a hippie haircut, you are getting serious Easy Rider level aggression stares, possibly just getting beat up for no reason. You are definitely not welcome. Like, there was a very clear dividing line there. But Graham's got confidence and he's got a self-destructive streak. So that makes it perfect because he'd walk into these places casually, get up on stage, start playing Buck Owens tunes, kind of win the people over slowly. But he definitely does not look like someone who should be playing country music. And he kind of fought against that by knowing so much about it and being really into it.
Yeah, because country at the time was very buttoned up. Like, again, the Buck Owens, like, they're wearing their rhinestone suits and everything is very put together. And I can just imagine somebody, again, just kind of coming in a little ramshackle, but killing it. It'd be very cool to see.
And the country world at that time was super produced, right? It was super tight ownership of the look and the sound. It was like the mafia, in its way.
That Nashville machine thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think he fit into that prescriptive country system.
No, definitely not. But even as the music was loosening up, like in the Bakersfield way, and you would walk into these dive bars with a bunch of country biker type dudes listening to music, there still was a formality about the look. I think that's important to understand, right? In addition to some formality about the music at times. So International Submarine Band does end up putting out a record, but pretty much right at that moment, Graham gets a random opportunity to join the Byrds, who are a huge band. And it's in part because they've just fired David Crosby and they're looking for some changes in the sound, and he jumps at it, right? And by the way, side note, I'm sure we'll get to the Byrds later because they have several records on the list, but they were apparently a very dysfunctional band throughout the entire time they were a band. They were like barely friends. Everyone kind of knew that they weren't even friends. They never hung out off stage, that kind of thing. And that pretty much continued.
I think it's important to hate your bandmates.
That's how you get the best performances, right?
Yeah, that's where the creativity stems from.
That's the energy you want to bring to stage.
So Graham is the guy who knows country music, and he more or less takes over the band, the Byrds, at least creatively or at least genre directionally, right? And they go in with him to record Sweetheart of the Rodeo at his direction. It's also on Diamery's list. It is a straight ahead country album, or maybe a country rock album. There's some standards on there. There's some Parsons originals on there, when we will get back to it eventually. So Graham's time in this band actually only lasts about 6 months, even though he does have a major impact on the band.
No way. I thought it was longer. Okay.
They record this record. Before it comes out, he's clashing with Roger McGuinn, the de facto leader of the band, pretty much from day one. And he's generally on the outs with everybody. He's not an easy person to be friends with, or maybe be in a band with sometimes too. He's a little unreliable. So during this period, they toured London, and the Stones, including Keith Richards, come to the show. Because again, the Byrds are this huge act, right? They've had a ton of influence. And Keith and Graham become instant best friends. Keith just falls in love with him like instantaneously, and now he's in that circle, right? And I think one of the reasons for that, obviously they just hit it off personality-wise, but I wanted to mention that Graham was seen by Keith and by some of these other musicians as an authentic descendant of American roots music, especially to the British musicians he met. Rock and roll, if you think about it, is sort of in its second generation at this point. The first was coming out of the American South with the blues and gospel traditions and some of that country tradition mixed in. The second wave is being led in large part by white kids from the UK.
Right.
And they're excited to talk to someone who's more authentically ensconced in the American tradition. So that's part of it.
Oh, that's so funny. And that they identified him because his backstory, sure, his musical lineage might be a little more authentic, but he is definitely not hard scrabble, blues guy, country, worked the fields kind of thing. Like, he's kind of the rich kid coming over. So that's funny.
Absolutely. So, okay, like I said, we'll cover the Byrds at some point. We did touch on this story during a previous episode, but I just got to mention how he quits the Byrds. The band were in London. They were scheduled to play some concerts in South Africa. The Stones pulled them aside and tried to convince the whole band not to go, to protest apartheid. But Roger McGuinn's like, no, we have a contract. Like, I'm not hearing it. The Byrds are going. And on the morning of the flight to South Africa, with the bags packed and the cabs have the motor running, Graham just doesn't show up. And then when Roger goes to his room, he won't leave the room or talk to him about it. That's him quitting the Byrds.
Jeez.
He burned some bridges, we could say.
Power move.
Now, Graham, of course, says it was about apartheid that made him want to ditch this band, but he already wasn't getting along with these guys. They were constantly butting heads. And on a previous episode, the Flying Burrito Brothers episode 55-ish, I believe. We posited 2 other explanations for why he didn't go. Fear of flying was one, although they definitely did fly. They got to London, right?
Right.
I think that was based on the idea that the Burrito Brothers did a train tour at one point, and they maybe said to a reporter that it was about fear of flying. I mean, that might have been a factor, but I don't think that was the main factor. A bigger factor is probably that Graham is just a star fucker who wanted to stay and hang out with the Rolling Stones.
I mean, who wouldn't? I could totally see, right? Yeah.
I think it's probably all these things a little bit.
They just took him to Stonehenge to drop acid, right? Like,
What are you going to do? Go to South Africa?
Exactly.
No.
yeah, next you like indoctrinate me into the Illuminati or something. Like what comes next? Who knows?
So he's only in the burns for like 6 months, and the record hasn't even come out yet. In the end, Sweetheart of the Rodeo, the record they made together, it's not very successful commercially, but it becomes a bit of a cult classic country album. But unfortunately, over contract disputes, most of Graham's vocals get cut from the final product. Or was it Roger McGuinn erasing him from the picture during the mixing sessions? It's hard to say, right? Now, Graham heads back to LA to start again. He comes ever so close to joining another band starting up at this time. A low-key favorite on this show goes by the name of Poco.
Yes!
Now, Richie Furay digs him and wants him in the band, but Jim Messina puts the kibosh on Graham Parsons joining Poco.
What could have been? What could have been?
After a few more months of bouncing around, his old Bird bandmate, a guy called Chris Hillman, leaves the Birds. They reconnect. They start flying Burrito Brothers, yet another terrible name. As I said, as I've been talking about, we covered their debut record, Gilded Palace of Sin, way back on episode 55, so I'll breeze through this. But suffice to say, they were pioneers in this cosmic country fashion, country music played by long-hair hippie types or in a rock band format. And they did other silly things like touring the country on a train, which was not lucrative, certainly. So I'm kind of skipping through that because you can go reference episode 55 if you like. Now, little side note, because I had always wondered about this. I always heard this rumor. The Burritos ended up recording, not on Gilded Palace of Sin, but on their follow-up. They recorded Keith Richards' song Wild Horses before the Stones did it for Sticky Fingers, right? Which led to a lot of incorrect speculation that either Graham had wrote it, co-written it, that was about him, any of that stuff. I couldn't find any substantiation of any of that. It is 100% a Keith Richards song, and he just offered it to Graham before the Stones made the definitive version of it.
I definitely thought it was a Graham Parsons song for the exact reason you just described. And it makes sense that I would think that.
I think it is very fair to say that a lot of the Rolling Stones sound in the 70s was influenced by Keith's relationship with Graham Parsons.
Yes.
Because we'll talk more about it. He even shows up in the recording sessions for Exile on Main Street. But that period of the Stones, that kind of Sticky Fingers, Exile period, they're the best American band that is somehow British.
Right.
I don't understand it either. We'll get back to those records later, right? But clearly that is being influenced by Graham Parsons. Now, the Burritos, I should say, also played Altamont, which is kind of an interesting historical factoid. That's the infamous free concert in Northern California.
Oh, yeah.
That the Rolling Stones put on in December of 1969 and had the Hells Angels provide security, and a fan got killed and several others badly beaten, and it was really a bad scene. They made movies about it. Maybe you've heard of it, right? At this point, Graham is way more interested in hanging out with Keith Richards or the Stones entourage than he is of working with the Flying Burrito Brothers. And speaking of which, he was specifically pals with Keith, not Mick. In fact, Mick was sort of nakedly jealous of their relationship at all times.
He's sliding in, stealing his buddy.
Yeah, exactly. And the read on this that I heard was that Mick kind of feels like he stole Keith away from his old best buddy, which is Brian Jones.
And then murdered him.
That too. And no, he probably didn't do that. And then he didn't, obviously they had a really creatively satisfying partnership going on with songwriting, and that's continued to this day of recording. The Rolling Stones are still around. Keith and Mick are still working together. So he definitely felt threatened by that relationship. There's even an incident that I read about where the Flying Burrito Brothers had a gig and they couldn't find Graham. And so they go to a Stones recording session that's in LA or whatever, and they have to like pull Graham out of there and he's like, he won't come to the gig, to the point where Mick apparently got up in his face and is yelling at him like, you have a responsibility to your bandmates, get the hell out of here.
Jeez. Can you imagine being scolded by Mick Jagger? Wild.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So,
He's just using a ton of drugs at this point, too, right?
yeah, I think the drug use is slowly but steadily ramping up. As we know, Keith Richards is a fan as well.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure there was a lot of music and a lot of getting high, too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of different kinds of ways to get high as well. So,
No judgment, right? Keith is like, whatever, dude.
in any case, he gets fired from the Flying Burrito Brothers, right? And the Flying Burrito Brothers, as we sort of mentioned, they were a hit with other bands. They were considered new and pioneering, but they weren't a commercial success at all. They did continue along without Graham. But back to Graham's story, right? He's already experimenting with heroin at this point. But one thing that most certainly drives him deeper into that is that he gets into a bad motorcycle accident. And he gets into the accident because he tries fixing the bike himself with a coat hanger, which results in the handlebar fork detaching and hitting the pavement while he's riding it.
Now that's country. Who's going to say this guy's spoon-fed now, huh? No silver spoon in his mouth, fixing my motorcycle with a coat hanger, boys.
That's crazy.
Okay, so in other heroin news, around mid-1971, he gets invited to the south of France, Keith's place where the Stones were in tax exile and recorded the classic album Exile on Main Street. We will definitely loop back and cover the Exile story, both because it's a great record and because in some ways it's an archetype of the mythical sequestered album recording session. I really think that's where that idea started, and so we'll get there. But anyway, my point is he does a bunch more heroin with Keith, and he eventually gets kicked out of those sessions and sent home with his tail between his legs. Now, there's a rumor that Keith needed him gone because he, quote, thought Graham was doing too much heroin, which is really saying something.
That's intense.
Yeah, when Keith finally lets you know enough is enough, you know?
Yeah, and I read Keith's autobiography some years back, and I remember specifically him talking about how he was going to be sequestered in France, so he ordered like a 5-pound bag of uncut heroin.
Holy
and then he had to, it was so strong that he had to like do math and like cut it down with baby powder himself.
Oh, heroin math. That's great.
Good time. Hey man, he's still kicking. He's still out there doing his thing, you know?
He is. He did something right.
After Exile, on both the record and Graham's situation when he gets kicked out, he gets married. He moves into the Chateau Marmont in LA, kind of a posh old hotel. He collects a bunch of Elvis's backing band to head into the studio to record his first solo record entitled GP. Now, at this point, during these sessions, he's drinking a lot. He could barely sing. He's chubby for the first time in his life. His friends slap him around a little, tell him he's blowing it. So he straightens up enough to finish it. But side note from this era, possibly just before he got a recording plan together and was just futzing around, there's a quote from one of Graham's handlers at the time about how messed up he was. And this guy says, I got a phone call to go down to the studio. Graham was on the floor trying to sing a vocal, and the engineer was asleep at the console, and the console was off, and there were no lights on in the whole place.
Wait, was he funding his own handlers since he's really rich, or was like there a record company?
Yes, it's like he had body men around him.
I was thinking too, this wealth must just be fueling this habit, right? Because none of these past projects really got any major commercial success. So he's really got this bottomless well to pull from to fund his habit.
I mean, he's got 400 large a year.
It's true. Effectively $400K a year.
So fucking much.
Yeah.
It's true. And you know, to be fair, you do hear a lot of addicts, or I've heard rich addicts say, hey man, it's not really a problem, even heroin, until you run out of money. Like if you can get it and you can pay for it, it's a very manageable habit. The problem comes in when you can't get it or you can't pay for it and you start doing various things to get it. Suffice to say, his trust fund is driving a lot of this. But during that recording session, lightning strikes. He gets a recommendation to check out a young singer named Emmylou Harris. Emmylou was playing small clubs after she had made it to New York at the very tail end of the folk scene there. She had released one record that didn't go anywhere, and she was feeling really jaded about the music business and living in DC and actually thinking about retiring from the business entirely. So Graham sees her, immediately falls in love with her singing voice, and puts her on that record. Now, around this time, I should mention that Graham is severely bummed that country rock is now the thing, and that his influence is not being cited, and he's not riding the fame train. And then it's all kind of being commoditized. I mean, maybe it would never have been enough for him, but think of the Grateful Dead's American Beauty, very country influenced. His old bandmate Bernie Ledden, from the Burrito Brothers, who's founded a new group called Eagles.
The Eagles, right.
Now, Graham publicly called them a plastic dry fuck.
That's fair.
He's not in a good place. He doesn't feel like he's gotten his due. But clearly influenced these other bands and this move towards countrification of rock and roll.
This is one of the only records, and it's the Ooh Las Vegas song in particular, Scott, that really got me. I was like, man, this sounds like the Grateful Dead more than anything I've maybe ever heard. And what I mean by that is like, it seemed to like capture the essence of that sort of like California Tex-Mex jam band thing. Yeah, we've all heard a lot of bands that try to do the Dead, and it's like silly, but like that seemed to capture a different essence. It was pretty interesting.
I agree. It does sound like the Dead, especially via guitar playing. But I think that probably is another example of someone like Jerry Garcia felt like he really grew up in that tradition.
Of course.
Then moved away from it to have this rock band, this psychedelic rock band, and then was like trying to get back to that more and more, right? Because he started as a bluegrass player.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the record, GP, comes together somehow. At one point, Merle Haggard was attached as a producer, but he backs out at the last second. It's got some level of interest and acclaim as it releases, but not a lot. They head out on a tour called the Fallen Angels Tour, and frankly, it starts out pretty rough. It's a new touring band. Graham is messed up night after night. The band starts playing one song. He sings another song. Emmylou is trying to watch his mouth to figure out how to harmonize with him.
But the band is smoking, right? This is Elvis's backup band. So these guys are...
Elvis's backup band, I don't think, went on the road with him.
Okay, all right.
So they're in the studio, and the new band is trying to figure him out, and he's just at a low point.
Got it. Okay.
But they do get tighter over time, particularly him and Emmylou, and I get the impression that Graham himself kind of eventually was on the road to cleaning up at this point, right? And I should point out that they sing together so beautifully. I feel like it has to be mentioned. Everyone in this arrangement states that they never had a romantic relationship, but it certainly feels like they have a very special connection.
Totally.
Yeah.
But okay, back off the road from this tour, Graham, who's got a 2-album contract, sets about working on number 2. That's Grievous Angel, the one we're talking about tonight, what will become that. Before the sessions can begin in earnest, yet another tragedy and seminal event for Graham Parsons. A guitar player and close friend of his named Clarence White dies at 29 when a drunk driver hits him during a loadout after a gig.
Ooh.
What?
God.
So he's just like standing around?
Just standing around loading gear.
What a shitty way to go. Oh, my God.
And this dude was a great player. He was in the Byrds for a while. He did like tons of country session work. He has a lot of great credits. But one of the reasons, other than the tragedy itself, that it impacts Graham is the funeral that Graham and some of his friends go to is super conservative and Catholic and not at all personalized. And it really bums him out and his friends. And the priest in charge literally does not mention Clarence's name during the entire service. Like, that's how impersonal it is, right?
Yeah.
And apparently there is this beautiful moment at the funeral where Graham impromptu stands up and leads a cathartic sing-along of the song Farther Along, which is an old hymn you guys might know. It's a great song. There are versions by the Burritos, the Byrds, Johnny Cash, people like that. It's beautiful. So cut to Graham drinking with friends after the service. With one friend in particular, he makes a pact. He says, whichever one of us dies first, don't let this happen to us. I don't want this low-key religious ceremony.
Right.
Don't let this happen to me. I want to be cremated, and I want my ashes scattered at Joshua Tree in the desert outside of LA, which is a favorite hangout of him and his friends at the time. Hint to the listeners, this is called foreshadowing.
Very subtle. Thank you.
Graham and Emmylou begin the Grievous Angel sessions in the summer of 1973. It's a much more planned out affair because they've been on the road together now, and a lot of these songs were getting played on the tour, worked out on the tour. They're much tighter as singers, etc. He reassembles Elvis's TCB band, the Taking Care of Business band, who are awesome.
Hell yeah.
That's James Burton on guitar. It's Glenn Hardin. That's drummer Ron Tutt. That's bassist Emery Gordy from all from this band. And there's also guest stars on the record you might have noticed, like Linda Ronstadt and Bertie Ledden is on here as well. A side note, the bass player, Emery Gordy, is the first producer listed on Steve Earle's Guitar Town, which we reviewed a long, long time ago, and which I won't tell you the episode number for because we weren't super kind to.
Outlaw country, baby. Outlaw country.
Definitely Steve Earle was influenced by this, for better or worse. So Now, Graham is somewhat struggling with new material, and he's anxious to record nonetheless. So you're getting some of these country standards mixed in, which was kind of the style at the time. It's sort of how his first record is as well. And we talked about Willie Nelson's Redheaded Stranger, right? And you also get two rather old Graham Parsons songs, Brass Buttons, which he had recorded with the Burritos, and a song called Hickory Wind, which he had recorded with the Byrds. It's actually on Sweetheart of the Rodeo. But that said, according to everybody, these sessions were happy. Extremely happy by comparison to that first record. Some folks around him say he was off heroin entirely at this time, and while that's not completely clear, he was at least hiding it way, way better. So they finish up pretty quickly. They finish up in September. And to celebrate, Graham decides to head to his favorite spot in the world, Joshua Tree National Park. This was like a home away from home, a little motel called the Joshua Tree Inn. It's out in the desert outside of LA, right? And a crappy little dive bar where him and his musician friends would go to unwind. He's with his semi-estranged wife, Gretchen, but she's still there, and another woman, plus his best bud, Phil Kaufman, who he made the pact with. Now, pact buddy Phil decides to drive off into the night to score some weed. While he's gone, Graham buys some morphine from a stranger. He takes 2 shots of it. By the way, it is chemically very similar to heroin. While he's in the motel, he takes 2 shots of it and he ODs. And as we mentioned on the Burrito Brothers episode, his girlfriend initially revives him with a home remedy of putting an ice cube up his butt.
Yeah, I've read that remedy.
I do kind of remember that, yeah.
It's hard not to think that's slightly funny, but...
I read a book about the band once, and this remedy came up like a Big Pink situation.
Apparently it works very well.
All right.
Because even in this instance, they say he popped right up and the patient seemed awake. And somewhat okay, right? And so they kind of relax a little bit. Unfortunately, the protocol after that is that you're supposed to keep the person awake. And Graham slips off to sleep and stops breathing. Now, neither person he's with is overly practiced at dealing with this situation. And of course, they're afraid of the police. It takes them way too long to call an ambulance. By the time the pros get there, Graham is too far gone. He's declared dead at the hospital in September of 1973. He is 26.
Oh, man.
So the official cause of death is a little inconclusive. It's either what they call a relapse OD, which is he thought his tolerance was higher than it was, and he took a sane amount and it just affected him differently, or it's some kind of conglomeration, heart attack from drinking and pills, and he was probably on sleeping pills at the time as well as drinking a bunch of alcohol and just beating your body up, generally speaking, right? Either way, this feels like a good moment to do Graham Parsons by the numbers.
Yeah.
First number I want to throw out to you is number 3. That is, including this one, the number of album covers designed by the same designers that we've covered here on this show. The other covers, by the way, are You Experienced and Astral Weeks, which perhaps not coincidentally are also slightly out of focus shots of the artist.
Yeah, they all kind of have that same kind of vibe, right?
I don't think any of them was particularly great.
Totally.
But I bring it up so that I can tell you this designer's name, which is Ed Thrasher.
That is awesome.
No, that's punk.
Yeah.
All right. Next number 2, the number of 70s songs that were written about Graham by other artists, at least 2. There's My Man, written by Bernie Leadon and appearing on the Eagles' On the Border, and the track Crazy Eyes, the title track from Poco's 1973 album, which was released a few days before Graham died. By the way, that Poco also does a cover of Brass Buttons.
Oh, nice. All right.
Now, again, audience, these Poco references are really just for Adam, but anyone else is welcome to get excited about them also. All right, next number is number 2. Graham died at 26, just 2 months shy of his 27th birthday, which would have put him in the vaunted 27 club. He couldn't even get that part of rock stardom correct.
Bummer.
Next number is 195. That is the highest chart position of Grievous Angel on the Billboard charts. Though it was instantly critically acclaimed, it would take a long time for it to become a cult classic and to be heard by many, many people. And nowadays it is in the 400s on Rolling Stone's top 500 albums of all time.
All right.
And I got one final number for you all. It is 17, as in 17 cents per day. That's what our Patreon will cost you to join up. Buy us a single domestic beer each month, which we will share while recording this. And you will immediately gain access to hours and hours of bonus content. You probably know if you're a loyal listener, we work really hard to bring you this research and hilarity. And we sincerely do appreciate y'all listening to us yammer and stammer through it every week. The bonus content like Song Battle or Guilty Pleasures is now a library's worth of us cutting loose even more, breaking up the format a bit, talking about the songs we love and don't love, but of course, still giving you 1,000,001 tidbits of music history that you can repeat until your friends politely ask you to stop. And if that's a bridge too far, we totally get it. Consider joining up completely for free. Get into the comment threads with not only other listeners, but us. We're in there too, defending ourselves, throwing each other under the bus more so. And it's a rollicking good time, I assure you. So regardless of how you choose to support us, we do appreciate it, folks.
And I'm not saying you should swap out your Save the Children 17 cents a day, but I'm saying in addition to, you could help.
Yes, very reasonable. All right, we're going to close out Graham's story here, and then we're going to talk about the songs. So you'd think Graham's story would end here with his death, but it does not.
More tragedy? No.
What follows is one of the stranger rock and roll stories in history, so it must be told here.
All right.
Phil Kaufman is Graham's friend and sort of his body man, and also the guy who was with him at the Uptight funeral, and they made this pact together. Don't let this happen to me. So Kaufman had been with Graham that night, as I mentioned, but he had left to go out for more drugs and thus felt really guilty about not being there when Graham died, when Graham needed him. Plus, he wanted to fulfill his friend's wishes, right? So briefly, let's just touch on who this dude even was. He's an outlaw biker guy who worked security for the Stones in LA for a bit. That's how Graham met him. He also has a weird claim to fame that he had known a guy called Charles Manson while in jail in the 60s. This is before Manson was famous. Man. And befriended him. And even lived at the Manson Ranch before the Helter Skelter murders again.
Wow.
And seemed like he absolutely did not shy away from that factoid after Manson became a celebrity, even after the trial went down.
Also punk.
Also,
Yes, and in fact, speaking of punk, here's the best beat, because if you might recall that those Helter Skelter Manson murders, the trial included the eventual conviction of 3 young women, I want to say teenage women or early 20s, and Kaufman was heard to remark to several people that he had slept with all 3 of them on multiple occasions.
What a class act.
Yeah, fucking the trifecta.
Dirtbag, man.
He's definitely a dirtbag. So I don't think I'm telling tales out of school here. I think everyone pretty much agrees. On the back of the Grievous Angel record album, which I have sitting next to me here, he is credited with executive nanny services.
That sounds gross, given everything you just said.
I'm just trying to stress that he wasn't afraid of running afoul of law enforcement,
yes.
particularly. So he gets back to Joshua Tree that night. He finds out Graham died. First things first, let's clean up the room. I got to clear everything out. I got to bleach everything, whatever, so the cops don't find any drugs. And then he hatches a plan to steal the body.
Oh my God. Wait, steal the body? Okay,
I
sorry.
know. It's hard to even believe that this actually happened.
Because I can get the shovel buddy aspect. You go in and you clean the room, you throw out whatever, but...
Sure.
All right, I'll let you go. Go ahead.
That's just being a bud. No, this is above and beyond, let me tell you. So he borrows a hearse somehow, and he shows up at the small airport where Graham's coffin is being loaded into a plane to head back to his family, who's now living in New Orleans. And he talks his way into getting them to hand the coffin over to him.
Yeah.
Just through bluster. He's like wearing a suit or whatever, and he's like, no, they said it needs to go with me.
This makes perfect sense. That's how I would do it.
Then, apparently, right as he's getting possession of the coffin with Graham's body in it, a cop pulls up and starts walking towards them with a kind of, what the hell are you doing sort of stare. So he thinks quickly, and he asks the cop for help putting the coffin into the hearse, and the cop helps him. Mm-hmm. Then he and another buddy speed away into the desert, drinking and hollering, right? They're definitely drunk as this is happening, in case that's not clear. They get to Joshua Tree that night. They pull the coffin out. They open it. They then comment on Graham's naked body, and by this I mean make dick jokes about their dead friend. Then they pour kerosene all over him and set it aflame.
What?
Then, of course, they get the hell out of there.
Dude, that is insane.
Pretty wild.
I mean, we can enter some kind of death pact. I'm down with that. But, like, I don't need or want all this, just to be clear.
Yeah, use a professional in my pack. There's a contingency there that you have to use a professional.
The corpse desecration.
Because to be clear, what Graham said was, I'd like to be cremated and have my ashes scattered.
I'd like to be soaked in kerosene and set ablaze on the side of a road. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I heard an interview with the other guy who's not Phil Kaufman, who was kind of like along for the ride and enlisted for this. And they were like, Graham's body had an autopsy. It wasn't like embalmed and ready for a viewing. It was like grotesque.
Oh, God.
So yeah, it's weird, right? He burns, I guess, most of the night. He's discovered the next day. His body was, of course, very badly burned. What remained of him was shipped back to the South and interred in a small ceremony. He's buried in New Orleans, what's left of him. Philip Kaufman got charged with what he quipped was Graham theft Parsons.
I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
For a complete sleaze bag. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, can't sleep on that, man.
I think they actually got him for a coffin theft. Like, it seems like the cops really did not know what to make of this crime. It was so bizarre. So he ends up just paying a fine and getting probation.
Corpse desecration's a thing, right? I don't know if that's a...
Can you imagine when they got the whole story of the cop that ran into him at the airport? That guy never fucking lived that down. Comes back to the station. Hey, what's up, buddy?
Can you help me move this water cooler? Shut up, Bill.
Yeah, exactly.
That is how Graham Parsons, that's what happened to him after his death. It's
Whoa, dude, that's crazy.
bizarre. I believe there was like a terrible movie made about this called Graham Theft Parsons, which maybe Phil Kaufman helped get made, where Johnny Knoxville played Phil Kaufman.
Johnny Knoxville.
It's like a precursor to Weekend at Bernie's. It's just adapted screenplay on morphine.
We're now on to the release of Grievous Angel. Graham dies in September of 1973. It comes out in January of 1973. So just a couple more details, then we'll talk about the songs. Despite Graham's death and the body theft story, which created a fair amount of press, as you can imagine, at the time, the album didn't sell very well initially. Even in death, you'd think that would be the one thing you could do for your career. It didn't really crystallize.
Didn't move the needle.
Now, here's another bummer. Graham had apparently wanted and even taken photos for the cover that showed him and Emmylou getting equal billing and equal weight in the photo.
I did hear about this.
But unfortunately, after his death, Graham's then wife, Gretchen, who he was kind of estranged from and who none of his friends liked, got to make all the decisions about his estate. So she chose this weird fat photo of him that we're seeing here.
Yeah, it's a little not exactly flattering.
It's not flattering. No, he's definitely a handsomer looking guy at other times in his life.
Yeah.
And it's a bummer that Emmylou got downgraded. She, on the back of it, it says with Emmylou Harris. But in Graham's mind, it was definitely like a joint album the whole way. And she also, Gretchen, his estranged wife, she also named the album. Graham had recorded a song called Sleepless Nights and had plans for that to be the name of the album as well. But she went with the one he had a hand in writing, which does make sense. And ultimately, I think that was a good change. Sleepless Nights was a cover song. But ultimately, critics did praise it when it came out. Robert Christgau, noted grump, said, Emmylou Harris cuts Parsons' soulfully dilettantish quaver with dry, dulcet mountain spirituality.
Jesus Christ.
This guy can write a sentence.
I know.
Emmylou, as I mentioned, got a solo deal with Warner Brothers based on this record and went on to have a great career. And of course, the legacy of this record continues to grow. There's been a few benefit concerts celebrating Graham's music and his influence, a music festival that ran for around 10 years called Graham Fest with the theme of cosmic American music, and various tribute albums and bands, tribute recordings of these songs over the years. So it's grown in popularity as the years go on. That is the end of our story. Shall we talk about some songs, gents?
Let's do it.
Let's get right back into the first track and the sort of title track. It's called The Return of the Grievous Angel.
We flew straight across that river bridge last night at +2. Switchman waved his lantern goodbye and good day as we went rolling through. Billboards and truck stops passed by the Grievous Angel. Now I know just what I have to do. Pick it for me, James.
Okay, I won't bury the lead. This is just one of my all-time favorite songs. Full stop. I think it's beautifully written. It seems, after reading about it this week, that Graham worked with a poet called Tom Brown on the lyrics. I think that worked out great. I think there's so many great lyrics. I think there's terrific delivery, of course, great harmonies, as there are throughout, and few little unexpected turns in a relatively simple song. So last thing I'll say for now is it's also about one of my favorite subjects, which is the condition of being in a band on the road.
Ah, I didn't put that together.
What are the kickers? Because obviously I know what truckers are.
Shit kickers.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, are Cowboy Angels hookers?
They might be. That's good. Yeah. I think it's open to poetic interpretation. But yes, I think out with the truckers and the kickers and the Cowboy Angels, a good saloon in every single town is a crack line.
Yeah, absolutely. It's excellent. Yeah, I just was really hung up on like, what are the kickers? Kept asking myself this.
I actually think of all the songs on the record, this one grew on me the most.
I agree.
Where I initially thought it was a relatively weak start, and it turned into being one of my favorite songs on the album. I think that overall it's really nice. Pedal steel work throughout I think is great and very tasty.
So tasty.
Yeah, so tasty. That's the exact word that came to mind too, tasty. It's got a nice kind of guitar lead line too. And one of my favorite parts on the whole album is the pre-chorus piano lick on this track. And I think it's really strong. It really grounds it and points the attention at the chorus. And when the pre-chorus comes back in towards the end of the song, the guitar comes in on that pickup at about 3:47, and then there's that little solo that goes with the vocals on the final chorus, and that is probably just one of my favorite production choices and pieces on the whole album. I think that little bridge of like 15 seconds of song is probably one of the highlights of the whole album for me.
And I'll be damned if it did not come true. 20,000 roads I went down, 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 and they all led me straight back home to you.
That's dope. He also does the thing Adam likes where he calls out the guitar player before he plays the solo.
I love that shit, yeah.
Yeah, that's old school, but I like it.
And this guy's great. What's his name? James. You mentioned it earlier. James
Burton is lead electric guitar. Yeah.
Just like so classy. So just like he's just playing the notes, right?
Dude, he's TCB. He's from the TCB band.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So there's just many excellent choices, one after the other.
I think there is a lot of understated professionalism from the band.
Yes.
Just in a lot of little ways. You know, they never overplay. They kind of just know where to sit back in the arrangements, and it's really nice. And they take their little spots where they come, you know?
Yeah, the band is tight. And the vocals are great on this song too. The harmonies are great. The vocal melody's really, really good as well. It's a good song.
After the story, all of these songs are being kind of repainted in my head. But my initial thought, again, having no idea what I was walking into when I put this on, it didn't really blow me away. I was not super impressed by this. I mean, the musicianship was stellar, and it wasn't until a couple takes through it that I started to actually listen to the way the harmonies were working, and their voices really they complement each other very well. You know, I won't say it's quite McCartney and Lennon, but the timbre of their voices work really nice together. So I definitely dug that about this as an opening track, and it's a great preview of what you're going to get on the rest of the album. It's not like it's just this one song and then the rest is all ballads. There's a couple ballads in there, but you know, you get a nice little mix of what you're going to stumble on this.
Yes, absolutely. I think also I noticed there's nothing really alt about this. It is straight country. Am I right here? I mean, it's...
Well, the only thing I noted, again, because I went over and I listened to Conway Twitty and Loretta Lynn had an album that came out maybe like 71. And you're definitely not going to get lines like unbuckling the old Bible belt or amphetamine crown or any of that kind of...
Yes, love that line. Talked about unbuckling his old Bible belt and heading off for some desert town.
Yeah.
Like, that just gives me a chill, man. I think that's great.
It's a great line.
Just, I don't know. It's just very poetic and interpretable to what the heck he's talking about. But I think that's what makes it great. And I would say I've heard this song 1,000 times. I've sung it on my guitar many, many, many times. I still get chills when he says, billboards and truck stops pass by the Grievous Angel. Now I know just what I have to do. It just sounds so final.
I think this song is a really great, Rob, maybe you said that it sounds kind of pure country. I think this song is a great encapsulation of happy sad, which a lot of good music does well. And I think the best kind of happy sad music is somehow more sad because it is happy and sad, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think it has that happy sad feel. I think a lot of those lyrics that you're talking about, Rob, where they inspire hope but they're grounded in kind of misery at the same time, I think are definitely present here.
I mean, to be clear though, just to follow up on what Adam said, and it's, you know, part of the mission of our podcast is that part of what makes songs more resonant is connecting with the stories of the singers. And you don't have to know their life story necessarily to do that. I think some singers are really able to connect just through the microphone. And I do think these singers do that, but certainly the more you know about things, the easier it is to have it resonate with you emotionally.
Yeah, and I think the story too, it's always sadder when somebody is like they're down and then everyone thinks they're getting better. He's coming to the sessions and he's smiling and he's getting through the songs and he's enjoying himself and he's happy. And then he dies.
Yeah.
Like that is so much sadder than just somebody had a slow and eventual thing and then they eventually OD'd. Like that little glimpse of hope kind of like casts a shadow, or maybe it casts a light on kind of all of the songs on this album now as I go back and re-listen to it.
Yeah, but also like he's in a dark place mentally. He has to be singing these songs in these ways, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe this is a good opportunity to move on to the next song. It's also the next song on the record. It's called Hearts on Fire.
Hearts on fire. My love for you brought only misery. Hearts on fire. Put out the flames and set this cold heart free. One short year, our love had burned until at last, I guess you learned the art of being untrue, and then goodbye. What could I do except to cry and moan?
All right, I have two comments about this song immediately. One, is there some other version of this song? Because this was the one that really, like, I felt like I had heard it before, but no matter how much I dug, I couldn't find it. I couldn't place it.
You're not thinking of Love Hurts.
No, I'm not. I'm thinking Hearts on Fire, because I immediately thought of the Dead song Wheels on Fire, but that's just a very different song. They're not even remotely similar.
I mean, I'm sure people have covered it. I see, as I just Googled it, I see Randy Meisner has a song called Hearts on Fire. It might be this song.
I love the combination of the vibes and the pedal steel. So cool. Just so hip, and the vibes give the whole sound this weird, like, three-dimensional quality.
I like the xylophone on this song. I don't know if it's vibes or a xylophone, but I think it's really tasteful and it's well done and it's well executed and it does elevate the song as a whole, but it does make it feel very dated to me. And I don't know why. There's something about the vibes part with the vocal just feels so 70s listening to it.
I agree with that.
And I think it loses some of that kind of timeless feel that I think a lot of really great music feels more timeless. And this one, I'm like, oh yeah, this for sure came out in the 70s.
It's not bumping me as a dated thing so much as I did write that I think it's too present in the mix at times because it has that like insane sense of vibration.
Yeah.
It just kind of permeates a lot of the listening experience. I think it is a cool texture and I think it's deployed well, but I'm blaming the mix a little bit for that.
Yeah, the other piece I would say when the xylophone's playing and the piano part is kicked in, I think it's a little bit too busy.
Yeah, the piano definitely gets lost.
Yeah, my note was that the vibes player, I think he slipped a $100 bill to the producer or the mixer at the end of the session because if you listen carefully, the piano and guitar are crushing it in the background, but they're barely audible. And you're right, Rob, you have this kind of the vibrato of the vibes is just kind of swirling in your head and everything kind of gets lost a little bit in the background.
At times, yeah. I do think it was a little mixing oversight. That said, I really do love the song. I think it's a very well written song. This one was written by Emmylou's then boyfriend and another songwriting partner. And I think they sound great together on it. It's top 2 in terms of just raw singing for me on the record. And I'll compliment the drummer on this one. I think he's really sitting back and giving country pocket here in a really nice way.
The track opens with the snare playing rim clicks, which is nice because it just gives you a little more subtle approach to the backbeat. And then he comes in on the drum a little bit later.
Yeah. I just think the lyrics are terrific and it resonates on that level, you know? And again, you have Emmylou, this really talented high singer, just doing an amazing, amazing job. And you have kind of Graham's earthy everyman voice, bringing it back to humanity. You know, to me, that's a really nice contrast that you can't get from two men singing together, as beautiful as they are. It's just a different thing.
There are some great lines in here too. Like, my love has turned to hatred and sleep still escapes me. Like, just some, it's pretty dark.
Yes.
If you're listening to if you actually look at what they're saying.
Yeah. Hearts on fire, put out the flame and set this cold heart free.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great line. Okay, let's move on to the next song. It's called I Can't Dance.
I can't dance, I never could. I guess my feet don't match. I've been out there on the floor, but I'm afraid of hurting my back. I can't dance, I guess I'm just one of the unfortunate few. So just for a little bit, baby, I'll come out and dance with you. But I can't dance, and I'm feeling so good, yeah. Some of us can, some of us can, some of us wish that they could dance. I can't dance, I guess I'm just one of the unfortunate few.
I listed this as my low light, though I did debate the fake live take medley track, which is a really silly production choice.
I don't know what the deal with that was. I'm glad that was skipped.
But I like the songs in that. I really do think Hickory Wind is a great song. I do not know why they put a bunch of crowd noise on it at random times. But anyway, in general, I like the slow songs better than the up-tempo songs. And I thought this was just a little goofy. And I thought, in particular, the sequencing of it was really strange. You're coming in after these two heavy, pathos-laden tracks. You're about to go to two more slow songs. This is lyrically light. Emmylou takes a backseat. It just feels a little strange to me.
I definitely thought it was lame.
I thought this song ripped.
Yeah,
dude.
you like this one?
I do like that he's talking about hurting his back on the dance floor. That is funny.
Yeah, dude. I like the concept of I can't dance, but I'm gonna fucking cut it up. Right? Is like a great.
I like the concept. I just the song didn't sit with me.
I think the song's well done. I think it rips. I think it makes you want to dance, which is what a song about dancing should do. I think it's got a great bass line. The bass line I think is like really tight and kind of funky on this song. I don't know if anyone picked up if this reminded anyone of anyone else, but I was getting big "Give Me 3 Steps" by Leonard Skinner energy off this song.
Ooh, that's a good call.
Yeah, man.
And maybe that's why I like it, because I love that song. But like, that song's also about dancing, and it's like it starts with a dance, and this one's about dance. And I was like, the rhythm is not too far off.
I really appreciated something that allowed the band to really cook. And again, whether or not this was the right song, I appreciated that on side one there was something that perked me up a bit, because if this was an entire side one of just down, slow country vibes and slide guitar and sadness, it would have been a little rough to get through. But this was a bit of a breath of fresh air, a bit. And sure, it's corny, but yeah, I thought the band was cooking on this track. And so I appreciated they got a chance to shine.
Totally. No complaints about the band. I think it's ultimately a high low light, but I had to choose it just because it feels a little bit disposable. But I did want to mention to you guys that I researched the writer of this song. His name is Tom T. Hall. He's a country music Hall of Fame guy, informally nicknamed The Storyteller. And
Nice.
He also wrote the hit Harper Valley PTA, which I imagine you guys must know. And it was a hit for a woman called Jeannie C. Riley. You've heard it. And he had a hit himself with a country song entitled I Like Beer in 1975.
That song was re-released in 1990, 1995, 1999 on country radio.
Like, hey, other country singers since the 20s, that title was just sitting there, fixing to be written. Like, what were you doing?
Fixing to be written.
And last thought on I Like Beer, which is I happen to see the album cover of the 45 single of I Like Beer. It's just a full mug of beer with a revolver and some bullets next to it. And I just...
Good. That's
Hey man,
spot
give
on.
the people what they want. Yeah.
Okay, we can move on to the...
not even the hard pen. It has the hard pen, Adam.
There's something to...
From a pure singing perspective, this is definitely my favorite. I think the singing here is achingly beautiful. And although it is a cover, as we're talking about, it was written for the Everly Brothers, by Bordeaux and Felice Bryant, a husband and wife songwriting team who also wrote Bye Bye Love, which we brought up on Ray Charles' episode. They also wrote Rocky Top, which I know at least Phil and I know from Fish covering that song.
You know what's funny about that is I didn't mention it, but I thought the song Grievous Angel has just like hints of Rocky Top to it.
I mean, I guess it's in there somehow.
I laughed out loud when this came on because I was like, wait, what? It was just such a out of left field. But I do think that this is much better than
The Nazareth version. Oh, I love that tune though.
Yeah, and I do agree with Rob that I think the second half of this song is where the duet really shines with him and Emmylou. I think it's very powerful.
I will tell you that I never really thought much of the tune knowing the Nazareth version of the tune, which came out after this, and it has this kind of almost a heavy metal sheen to it. It sounds a little like Ronnie James Dio singing it.
Yeah.
But I think the song is so plain spoken in its approach to lyrics, and it's so hard on your sleeve, vulnerable, just so simply stated that to me it takes a very subtle and deft hand of arrangement to get it right. The Everly Brothers version feels like a dorky waltz. Of course, they sound great as singers, but it just sounds like a dorky waltz. The Nazareth version feels like really overwrought, and it's like overselling this really simplistic material, and that's why it never really spoke to me. So to me, it is definitely a simple song.
It's a classic 80s power ballad.
It's an 80s power ballad, exactly. So to me, I think they nailed it here in terms of like finding the right arrangement for the material.
I agree. I think that in my notes here, I have that this feels so much more sincere than any other version of this song that I've heard before.
Can I just also call out a timestamp? The little soulful pedal steel fills that pop up at 105. And then later they come back again during the solo section.
Tasty. I hate to nitpick, but hey, that's what we do on this show. I would have preferred, if I was back then, the duet the entire time to me is not a waste, but I feel like they use their secret sauce too early. If they had constructed the song in such a way that maybe he does a verse, she does a verse, and then they come in and the last verse is both of them, I feel like it would have been way more impactful than just running that constant harmony the whole time. That was my only real nitpick on this one.
I think it's a fair complaint. I think that I like, though, they went a different direction with it wholly, which is they went with 100% duet all the time. Like almost all of the time Emmylou's singing is harmonizing with Graham, and it's not the entire record, but it's got to be 80% of the record or something. You know what I mean? So I sort of respect that decision on that level. But I hear what you're saying.
My feeling after like growing up in the 90s and just listening to post rock and all that is right around 205, right before the bridge hits. That's where like the big drums come in, and then the fuzz guitar drops around 210.
Brugum. Yeah, right.
And the halftime, and then it stays in. The
right.
wall of fuzz and feedback stays in after the bridge.
All right, let's keep things rolling along. I know we're going a little long here. Last song on the focus list, last song on the album is called
because I saw the title of the song and I was like, oh, this is going to be a really rough one. And knowing that I was in a country mood, but it just sounded so produced differently, almost like it was from a completely different session. It's like I made a note that it sounds like Richard Carpenter from the Carpenters came in and arranged the vocals, and there were some weird effects on it. But then again, it looks like Linda Ronstadt was actually on this song. So I don't know if there was a different session, but it feels like it was kind of shoehorned in from a sonic standpoint. It doesn't feel like it matches the rest of the album. Maybe it does.
I think you missed the mark entirely once again, Adam. So in the finale of this very depressing record, you get the third voice finally in the harmony, Linda Ronstadt, which is awesome. And you get this sense of catharsis and hope out of the last song. I think both the lyrics and the arrangement are giving you that. There's this like ray of hope at the end. This is like uplifting aspect to it. I don't think it's the most perfectly crafted song or anything, but I appreciated that vibe switch. I do think it was purposeful. I think the sequencing was correct to kind of just lift you up out of the pit of despair that you've been in.
Well, there you go. There's the right answer. All right.
I actually also had this as the low point for me. I do like the song overall, but I just thought of them all, this was skewing on the weak side. And I thought it sounded kind of plain and lacked any real substantial oomph that made it unique. I do think that knowing the story, and I did my first, few listens of the album before I did any reading up on Graham Parsons' life. It does kind of hit a bit differently, right? And going through the lyrics and the kind of melancholy nature of the whole album and this song. But Adam, to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, I do think it sounds like it could be on any album. It doesn't sound like there's any particular unique features for it that really make me think like, what a strong way to close this record. And I think in that sense, it did kind of disappoint me a bit. But I do still think it's overall a fine song.
I should mention also, it's the only song that Graham and Emmylou Harris wrote together from the record. And it is directly about Graham's friends who have died. So the first verse is about a buddy he had called Brandon DeWild, who was a child actor that Graham knew from way back. He played the little kid in the movie Shane, if you guys remember.
Oh my God. Wow.
Anyway, he died in a car accident shortly before the age of 30. So the first verse is about him and the car accident. And the second verse is about his friend Clarence White, who we mentioned in the story, who got clipped by a drunk driver.
Damn.
I think it works for me. I agree it is a departure, and I'll also cop to the fact that I've heard this song the least of any song on the record because it's the last one. But it works for me. Okay, well, with that in mind, we get to our most exciting and thrilling conclusion, which is the voting. Voting is good and important. We should keep doing it. Please do it. And the question is, does this belong? Must you hear this before you die? Does it belong on that list? I'm going to throw it first to Adam.
Rob, you've said it before on prior podcasts. Context is everything. And if you had thrown this album at me and I didn't know the backstory and I listened to it front to back 10, 20, 30 times, I probably would have said no. Because to me, it just feels like it, kind of what I mentioned at the top. Nothing really jumped out and grabbed me. But what did grab me was your storytelling. So A, kudos on that. And it really does cast everything on this album in a different light that I think I can appreciate a lot more now. So I'm going to say yes. I think you do need to hear this before you die.
Nice. We won some hearts and minds. Next up, Phil.
Well, it was a good week. It was definitely a nice listen. And, before I give my final answer, I want to give a shout out to the band Cordovas. If you've enjoyed this record this week, there's a band out of I think they're out of Nashville these days. I think they're out of New Mexico recently. I feel like they're downstream from this, and I just think they're very cool. So if you like this record, you should definitely check out Cordovas. I'm going yes on Grievous Angel. I just enjoyed it. At the end of the day, I just enjoyed the record. This is the sort of thing that I think has just sets the mood nicely. I'll listen to this again. I thought the songs were arresting. It took a little bit of getting used to, but yeah, I think this is a yes.
Awesome. That's 2 yeses. Guest complainer Scott, what say you?
Yeah, he's got a hell of a story, and I think there is a substantial cultural impact that does come from Graham Parsons' output as a whole. I don't know if it's specifically coming from this album, but yeah, my vote is also going to be a yes. And I think it's probably worth folks giving this a listen. It's relatively short. I think all of the songs individually are relatively pleasant, even if none of them are going to be the kind of banger that you're listening on repeat or anything like that. The album as a whole works really well, knowing the story and the context of it and seeing what Graham and the band and Emmylou were able to put together. It's a great album, and I think it is worth a listen for folks, especially folks like me who are not too familiar with the kind of Western genre or this country rock phenomena that kind of came about in the late 60s and in the early 70s. So yeah, my vote's going to be a yes.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to not keep you in suspense. I'm going to round it out, make it a unanimous vote. No surprise here. This record has a lot of meaning to me. Like I said, I've listened to it throughout my life. I've played these songs on piano and guitar just to myself, and I think it has a fragile, delicate beauty to a lot of the constructions and the songs and the lyrics and the performances. And I have listened to Graham Parsons' other solo work, GP. I think it's also good. I've listened to the Flying Burrito Brothers. I personally think this is the best representation of Graham Parsons for me. So it's a yes from me.
Nice.
Unanimous vote Mr. Parsons, you're on the list, baby.
Well done.
Okay, we have a couple things left to do before we close it out for the night. But first, I just want to give a warm thank you to guest complainer Scott.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on,
Awesome having you, man.
doing the Lord's work. Great having you. Go listen to Ghost Beef. Of course, get this country out of your mind and go to fast food-based heavy metal to hear some of Scott's amazing drumming.
Thanks again, everyone, for having me. This was a real treat. It's fun to participate in and to, get to give my own feedback after listening to so many episodes. So yeah, and go check out Graham Parsons. I'll give another plug too here. I would say the other thing that's really reminded me of this album is the artist Freddie Fender, if anyone's familiar with him. Cool. He is a Mexican-American singer-songwriter. And if anyone's watched The Bear, the TV show The Bear, it's one of his songs is the songs that the character Tina sings when she goes to karaoke.
Yes. Okay.
So it's got that same kind of melancholy country rock vibe.
Nice.
And it really reminded me of that a lot.
I had not heard of him, so I'm excited to check that one
that's
out.
cool.
I had listened to Cordovas that Phil mentioned, but yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Okay, well, on to the next stuff. Before we wrap it up tonight, thanks for sticking in there. We're going to reach our hand into the old mailbag and pull out a few missives. Mike stays with me. First, we have Andrew writing from Sydney, Australia. We have a lot of Australian listeners, or they like to write in. Either way, it's great. He says, "Hi, complainers. Loving the pod. Just listened to the CSNY episode on Deja Vu, where you referenced Lily the Pink for the second time in the series.
Yep.
And you again wondered how they managed to get Graham Nash singing on it. That's a real pull, because I believe Lily the Pink came up on the very first episode
Yeah.
of 1001 Album Complaints. We were talking about what was a hit on the radio when Led Zeppelin 1 came out. And it was this goofy song called Lily the Pink. Anyway, Andrew goes on, because this is a new tidbit. The song was by the band The Scaffold. We did say that. They were a comedy trio out of Liverpool and included one Mike McGear, whose real name was Mike McCartney, whose brother Paul was reasonably famous at the time.
Whoa.
So this is the explanation for why Graham Nash and many other big names, including Elton John and Jack Bruce, were happy to help out. By the way, in a book I once came across, the other McCartney, the McCartney brother from The Scaffold, tells the story of Jimi Hendrix dropping by during one recording session and offering to play a solo on one of the tracks. Of course they agreed. Hendrix rolls off a jaw-dropping solo in the first take. No duh. Even so, they asked Hendrix if he wouldn't mind doing a second take, which he did. Everyone agreed the first take was better until the engineer said, "Sorry, I taped over the first take with the second one."
Oh, no.
What?
That is a great deep pull and great factoid. Can't believe we missed that before. Paul McCartney's brother. Who even knew, right? All right, I got one more here. It's Bill writing to us from the other Wilmington in North Carolina.
Ooh.
Wilmington, Delaware's mortal enemy. No, I'm just joking. He says, "I just found your pod and I love it. I particularly enjoyed the JC Superstar episode. I've owned the album for as long as it's been out, and parts of it still cause frisson." And he linked me to a Wikipedia article describing what that means. It means when you get chills, an electrical impulse when you listen to the music. I loved hearing the background on the project and revisiting Andrew Lloyd Webber's early genius. Several new versions have been produced since then, by the way, with people like John Legend and Tim Minchin. Check them out. Well, spoiler alert, Bill, I have checked them out. Please, I'm a super fan, so I'm fully aware of those versions. But yes, and but he goes on to say, surprisingly, there was no discussion of Jesus dying but not rising. There's no resurrection song. Superstar, yes. God, maybe. I still appreciate the show despite having gone from young Catholic to Methodist to agnostic. Keep up the good work.
That's funny. Wow. All right.
He is right. We didn't call that out specifically, but I do think certainly the thrust of the piece was not coming from a religious, dogmatic background. But it is a great record, and I certainly enjoyed that episode because it's a favorite of mine. Cool. If you have anything you want to tell us about or alert us to all these little factoids, or just tell us you're enjoying the show or what we got wrong or what we got right, all of it, send it our way to 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com. We'll be excited to read it.
By the way, Rob is the marathon man today. My God, you've been going hard and long and strong. That sounds creepy, but good work, my friend.
I'm only gaining power as we round into our homework for next week. Yes, that's right. I have the Albinator here. It's got an ice cube up its plug hole, and it is ready
Good.
to spit out a new offering. Let's give that bad boy a spin and see what we shall be listening to next week. Drum roll, please. We shall be listening to Jurassic 5 is the band, and the album is called Power in Numbers. If I'm not mistaken, this is nerd rap,
Yeah, that sounds right. Nerd rap. Yeah.
which I'm all in for. So very exciting.
Nice.
We hope you join us as well. Listen to Jurassic 5's Power in Numbers. Listen along with us. Tune in next week. And for everyone here at the show, thank you for listening to The Bitter End. I've been Rob.
I'm Adam.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Scott.
Boosh.